Hello, Senators. Please follow the protocols listed on the screen during the Senate meeting. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is a meeting of the University Senate. It's my pleasure to call this meeting to order. Our first item is a motion to approve a special rule limiting each speaker to 2 minutes each time they are recognized. A 2/3 majority of those present and voting is required to approve the special rule. We don't need a motion or a second, but is there any discussion? Okay, with that, host, please initiate the poll.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 116 ayes, 6 nays, and 1 abstention, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Next item concerns administrative responses to the University Senate actions. This item is presented for information. I'll note that the administrative response for this meeting is our response to the COVID safety resolution passed at the last meeting. And when we make our presentations as president and provost during the Q&A, if anyone has specific questions, but otherwise we will follow tradition and simply acknowledge the response has been received, presented and received, and then move on to the next item. So the next item is a list of recent faculty, staff, and student deaths that have been forwarded for announcement to the Senate. I invite you to observe a moment of silence while I read these names. Leonard Farrington, Laura Johnson, Christy Lisi, Bert Stromberg Jr., and from our students, Robert Bradley Hanna. The next item is approval of minutes from the University Senate meetings on September 30th and October 6th. Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
Once again, we'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 137 ayes, 0 nays, and 9 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Okay, thank you. The next item is the president's report. So good afternoon, everybody. It's very nice to see you. Very, very busy time of year, even under normal circumstances. And of course, everything is just, as my kids would say, extra this year as we cross over into the second half of the semester. Very grateful for your support, for how hard you've been working, for what you've been doing, and your commitment to all of the protocols and the safety, your advocacy. It is seen and acknowledged, and I know these are just words and that everybody's really tired and probably a little over it, but we have been making very good progress this semester, and I'll have some details on that for you. And I am sincerely grateful for everything that everyone has been doing in order to make that happen. COVID-19 remains top of mind, obviously, as we work through the remaining weeks of the semester, start planning for the spring semester. We have not had any clusters or surges or outbreaks in any of the classrooms on any of our 5 campuses. In fact, one of our students who is working in the Health Emergency Response Office, or the HERO office that you hear us refer to, says this is also true across the Big Ten. We haven't done any national looks, but there's a lot of overlap in the protocols that our peers are using, and that is yielding the results that we would hope that it would yield. Our testing percent positivity is very low, significantly lower than the surrounding counties and state rates where they're located. This is an important fact because those who are going to test are those generally who are exposed or symptomatic. And so the fact that their positivity rates are low is great news. It means that colds and flu are back, of course, because that's what people's symptoms actually indicate, but otherwise the news is good. So thank you for everything that's been going on and brought us to this point. I'm very much looking forward to our conversations being about other things, hopefully very soon. In the meantime, our vaccination rates are exceptional. 99% of employees and 92% of students have reported a combined vaccination rate of 96% system-wide. Contact tracing is shifting, as you've seen in the news, with MDH changing their contact tracing protocols as we start to enter this next phase of the pandemic. We've issued guidance on this. I sent out an email on that, and I know everybody reads every email, but if in case anyone wants to refer back, there are links to these materials in our response to the resolution that was passed last time. We've updated the resources. Hopefully the instructions are clear for those who test positive and how to notify your close contacts. We've shared our materials. We've been asked for our materials across the state and with some of our peers in nearby states as in order to try to have some sort of best practice emerge out of this. Changes are coming though, because of course changes are coming because they've been coming at us this entire time. The latest sort of dizzying moment is the president's executive order. And of course, your own advocacy and requests that we've received from different constituencies to go to the next phase of our planning around Get the Vax. So some convergence around proof of vaccination and what the executive order requires and what you all have sought through formal resolution and otherwise. So in support of all of that together, as we sent a letter about, we're moving from the attestation process for faculty and staff to requiring all faculty and staff to submit proof of vaccination. We're standing up sort of the backroom operational steps necessary in order to make that happen. One of the biggest shifts in this is that this shift from attestation to proof will include all graduate assistants and student workers. Ken Horstman sent out a message on this yesterday, and Ken is here along with several other of the administrative team if questions come up during Q&A. Exemption requests will have a process. For those who qualify for an exemption, there will be testing requirements. We are trying to make this as easy as possible, as efficient as possible, and with the instructions as clear as possible. It's a bit of a lift to get it all going, but we're close. You may have seen in the news today, just a couple of hours ago, that the deadline was extended from the December 8th, I think, to January 4th. We may be able to still meet December 8th, but the margin of time would give us some time to ensure that everything is accurate and smooth and stood up. So we may eat into some of that extension. We're hoping not to. It is fortunately a period of time when there's relatively low density on all of our campuses. So we would like to use the time that we need in order to have things go smoothly and hopefully then not need it. So it's not our intention to use all of that time, but I do want to make you aware of it. For students who are not employees, they are not covered by the executive order, but they were covered by the resolution and other advocacy that we've received from this body and from several other student groups who may not necessarily be directly involved in student and in shared governance. So what we've done with students up to this point was ask for the dates of their shots and which type of shot they received. And we have all of that information. And rather than having them submit cards, which would require an operational change, we're auditing the data that they've already provided, which should take us to the same end, which is certainty that the vaccination rates that have been reported are accurate and that in fact our community is largely vaccinated. So that's a team project with internal audit, OIT, and Boynton working on that assessment. So they're going to make a report out on how that process will go in the next few days. And I'll keep you updated on that either through Ned and Colleen or through an email communication, depending on how formal the content of the update is. So more graceful pivots. I think graceful pivots is sort of like unprecedented. I'm starting to get really sick of saying it, and you're probably getting really sick of hearing me say it, but it is what we've been doing as the ground has shifted. But with hope that as this ground shifts, we are seeing the boosters availability and approval for children 5 to 11, and starting to see some of the results of that coming down. So with hope and optimism, and I'm sure some Q&A once I get through the report. So on to other things besides COVID. So the strategic plan is underway. It's actually about a year since the strategic plan was formally approved with your help by the Board of Regents. In December, at the December Board of Regents meeting, we'll be reporting out on the first year of the strategic plan work. Some of you may know that we provide an accountability report that is required by law to the legislature. And what we're doing is sort of merging the two so that there's one report to read on the attributes of the university that we report out publicly anyway, and we'll be adding in the status of different things in the strategic plan to that accountability report. It will all be up on the web, and I'm sure I'll send out an email about it for those of you who are interested. There were several components of the strategic plan that had a December 2021 deadline, and they're all underway and progressing. And so we should be able to meet all those deadlines, things like the Student Mental Health Initiative, completing the metrics around the strategic plan, things like that. So, you know, it's plugging along, and we're delighted. MSAFE, which is the initiative that was developed to implement, review and implement the recommendations from Dr. Cedric Alexander's review of policing, is underway with deep thanks to Mylene Colbraith and Kathy Quick and an entire large and significant representative committee that's doing this work. They had a kickoff retreat in September. They're into the next phase now, which is working under 4 thematic subcommittees. One is on UMPD roles and responsibilities. One is on Department of Public Safety, Technology and Equipment. This would be where the demilitarization resolution is receiving its review. One is on approaches to understanding existing climate and quality of interactions. And one is on suggested actions to enhance climate and quality of interactions. Each of these subgroups has been meeting regularly. Many of you are in these subgroups, so thank you for everything you're doing. And then this will come back for a second retreat at the end of the semester, which will result in recommendations that will get channeled to the appropriate body. So some will come back to this group, to the Senate Campus Safety Committee. Some will come to Chief Clark. Some will go to Senior Vice President Myron France. Some would go to me, as the case may be. Remains to be seen based on what those recommendations are. So thanks again to everyone involved in that process. It is a lot of work in its own right, and it's enhanced, of course, by the amount of work everyone is doing this semester being extraordinary, and also that this work is occurring concurrently with an uptick in crime in the neighborhoods surrounding the Twin Cities campus. And what that has meant for, you know, various pressure on all of us to respond. This work not necessarily easily coexisting, but we've been working very carefully to make sure that it does, that we're respecting our commitment to our campus community around how we do policing while also being prepared to respond to emergencies. So you've received lots of emails from Myron France about different updates and changes or tweaks that we've made to how we're doing campus safety, including regular communication and transparency around what those changes are, hence the frequency of the communication. As a reminder, all these have been in some of these reports, but we've acquired the Rave Guardian app. This is a virtual escort service on your phone. We have safety ambassadors in the neighborhoods now and a liaison within the police department. Gopher Chauffeur is back. These are safe rides 7 nights a week. We have a social worker within UMPD now to assist with engagement with people who call in or who are reported in crisis. We report on this regularly also to the Board of Regents so that there's public transparency around all of what's going on. And there will be more, particularly once the MSAFE recommendations are passed along. We recently also reported to the board and shared at our last time together that the PEAK initiative is underway. This is part of one of the strategic plan initiatives. PEAK stands for Position for Excellence, Alignment, and Knowledge. And we say, because we have to laugh about something these days, that everything has to have an acronym, but this effort is intended to look at the administrative function of the institution. It is not about academic affairs or student affairs, but about broadly what we would put under overhead in the administration. I don't really like using that word because overhead is people working really hard to make the place run well. But our intention with this project is to make sure that the people who do that work are put in the position to be as successful as possible, that the quality of the work they're doing is therefore at its highest level, which is great for everybody. And if efficiencies yield from that, that would be great too. That is a hopeful byproduct of this effort as well. The design phase is where we find ourselves these days. We've identified functional leads, sponsors, teams. The work is going and is largely focused at this point on human resources as sort of the kickoff administrative function. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that some of the work that is now part of PEAK actually started before PEAK existed around human resources, because we were going through a leadership change. And so there was some review of everything that began at that time. And some of it is because we want to make sure that our people are in the best position before we start diving into some of the other functions. It seems the most cornerstone of the administrative functions. And so we're doing it first. Once that's at a certain point, we'll move into some of the other areas. And we'll continue to report out on that progress. And then last week, I charged our new system-wide faculty misconduct task force. So the task force exists at the request, at my request, but was inspired by a suggestion actually from Liz Wright, who many of you know is the this year's UEA lead on the Duluth campus, to reflect this space that we've talked about for quite some time in this group and in others, where our faculty are, obviously deeply professional and dedicated, but that on occasion, individuals behave in something other than what we would hope, and that their misconduct can therefore disproportionately affect the climate and environments in which we work. And we are at this point somewhat constrained in what we do about that, because we are generally working with the legal standards associated with misconduct, but with a sense that the legal standards are a floor and not a ceiling. The task force is working together on how to make recommendations around what misconduct can do to climate or work environment in ways that would be self-regulated. This is beginning as a faculty effort. It wouldn't have to end that way, but this is the first phase of the work. The administration is helping. We're providing staff, but it is led by Jen Goodnow, who all of us know. And we are happy to receive the advice as it's formed. There's not a best practice to follow here. We're not looking at something that works successfully on another campus, but we have identified a gap that we think we need to fill. And so we've been, the charge is pretty loose as a result around strategies for prevention, rehabilitation and restorative justice, monitoring, and what changes might be legitimate for policies and procedures. The goal is to have recommendations by the spring, but that's a self-imposed deadline. If it goes faster than that, great. If it needs a little more time, great. And it's likely to be an ongoing process. I doubt that this is the sort of thing that you really finish, but this is where we start. And this team is working closely with the Provost's new task force on faculty behavior and graduate education that Phil Bowman is chairing. We also still have PIPSM and PRISM. And the intent is to be purposeful about how that work intersects, but they really do have, they have overlap, but also unique missions. And so we want to make sure that each component of that effort is able to move forward, and then just intentionally look for liaising between those efforts so that we don't end up with redundancy or initiative fatigue or confusion. That is the intent. And thanks again to Jen Goodnow for sharing this work. Another thing I want to update you on is namings and renamings, which we've been talking about pretty consistently for the last few years. So the renamings policy is going through consultation. We went into a pretty significant amount of detail on that last time, so it's not my intent to do that again today, although I can remind anybody during Q&A who would like such a reminder. We have all university honors on November 18th, SCC on November 22nd, full Senate with marked up language back to you then on December 2nd. Depending on the feedback we received during that consultative process will dictate the way in which we bring it before the Board of Regents in December. If the feedback is easily addressed, then we would be bringing it forward to the board for formal review. If the feedback is more material and requires another loop through, then we would give an update to the board and bring it to the board for review at a subsequent meeting. Just depends on how this phase of consultation goes, but that's where we are with things. But in the ensuing period, since we started the work on renamings and where we are today, the regular namings policy also came up in its regular cycle. So we've just merged that work together and are bringing the whole policy through the process now. And then searches. So an email went out this morning for 3 searches that are now going to be launched. Michael Go has decided on his own that he would like to return to the faculty in CEHD. Very grateful to him. We will do a national search for his successor. Duluth Chancellor Lynn Black will retire this summer. He's been the chancellor since 2010. Super grateful for his leadership and work. And then, of course, we will be looking for Chris Kramer's permanent replacement as VPR, with great appreciation to Michael Oakes, who's been doing a terrific job in the interim role and got a lot more than he bargained for when he agreed to do that. That is for sure. All 3 will be national searches. We don't have any news. We haven't thought about chairs. We haven't sent out the call for nominations for search committee members. You haven't missed anything there. If you have ideas, it's not too early to nominate yourself or someone who you think would serve well in either the chair's role or on the committee, but we will also do a formal call at some point soon, with the hope that we would be able to have public interviews in the spring. And if we're lucky, all 3 of our new leaders would start this summer. That's pretty quick, but we're hopeful. That's the target, such as it is. Senate director search is coming to its end. We interviewed finalists today, actually. And so we should have an announcement on that soon. We're doing the consultation around those candidates. So that should be coming out soon with really wonderful candidates as possibilities. And then lastly, the month of November is Native American Heritage Month, as we know. And as a university, we're out of the central office, putting out a lot of information around how we're celebrating and valuing traditions and accomplishments. And I know a lot of you are doing this individually and with your programs in colleges as well, to acknowledge the countless ways that our campus is better in every possible way because of our Native American partners and tribal community partners. And we also, of course, acknowledge that all 5 of our system campuses are located on traditional, ancestral, and contemporary lands of Indigenous peoples. This is a complex and layered history, and we've committed actively to educating our community members about these lands, about our relationship with the sovereign nations here in Minnesota and with our Native American partners beyond, and also advocating for Native nations and Native peoples. And this is a particular component also of the strategic plan, sort of in the desire for transparency and accountability to make sure that we are reporting publicly on this effort and are held accountable for our progress in this effort. So with this in mind, we previously, a few days ago, announced the new Native American Promise Scholarship. So this will start in fall 2022 to expand Morris's Native American tuition waiver to the other campuses, giving substantial financial support and in many cases free tuition for first-year undergraduate students and transfers from the tribal colleges who are enrolled citizens in one of Minnesota's 11 federally recognized tribal nations. So this is one of the most comprehensive free and reduced tuition programs for Native American students. And I want to thank MIAC, which is the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Many of you have been very strong proponents and advocates, and the colleagues who serve on our American Indian advisory boards on each of the campuses, and of course, Karen Diver, who has been a great partner as we figure out how to make this work meaningful, more than words, actual action, and it's just the beginning. So with that, I'm happy to take questions, and we'll start with a pre-submitted question, which comes from School of Public Health Senator Emily McGuire. So Emily has asked, and I'm just going to read this, Emily. To my understanding, the University of Minnesota does not consider voting to be an excused absence and leaves this decision up to individual professors and instructors. Is this the case? And the answer is yes, it is. And secondly, why does the U not allow voting to be an excused absence for all students on election day? Changing this policy to being an excused absence would allow more students to participate in the election, volunteer with campaigns, and work as poll workers. So it is true that our makeup work for legitimate absences policy does not explicitly excuse students from classes to vote, but we regularly ask instructors to consider reasonable accommodations for students who experience unforeseen delays that may make a conflict with their class schedule, and encourage people to use options like absentee and early voting. And we as a community, and me personally, always strongly encourage everyone to vote. But at our request last month, the provost charged a system-wide task force to look at a variety of questions around days off, holidays, excused absences, religious and cultural holidays, and to consider election day and the addition of a fall break together. It's been a while since we've done that work, and we need to. So we look forward to hearing that group's recommendations and advice. So with that, Chris, if you could help me, we'll take questions from the floor.
Sure thing. The first person I see up is Ellen Messer-Davidel.
Hi, Ellen.
Hi, thank you. There's been so much prose poured around the COVID resolution that I would like to obtain some clarity, particularly on point number 7, which emphasizes the importance of permitting remote work by campus members who have either immunocompromised people in their household or children ineligible for vaccination. It is the case, we know, that just because campus members are vaccinated, there can also be breakthrough infections that spread infection to other people. So I'm wondering if someone, President Gabel or maybe the provost, could speak to whether the departments that are authorized to approve remote work are actually going to do that for these individuals. And I realize that there's more than one unit that can authorize, the DRC, for instance, or HR. But I'd like to know if that's actually going to occur.
Thank you for that question. So I'm struggling with the way in which your question was phrased, Ellen, to be perfectly honest, but let me make an attempt. And if I'm not getting it right, then just follow up with me. There were many requests honored in this space for the fall semester. So it's not as if all cases were told no. The across the board nature of the request makes it difficult to say all will be treated one way or all will be treated another. These were all explored on case by case basis, sort of as you described, where some went through DRC, some were accommodations within unit, some were appealed. There were a lot of accommodations made for people with a variety of circumstances, either in their own health or in their familial circumstances for the fall semester. So we don't have an across-the-board policy, and we did not create one in response to the resolution, but have committed to working together with flexibility, with grace, to address the needs of those who feel that they want to be able to teach remotely. The provost can go into some of the specifics during her report, where she gets into more of the detail around the relationship between the deans and the program chairs and the faculty who may have made those particular requests. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah, I got unmuted. Yeah, thank you. I realize it's a complicated situation with several units involved in approving these requests. But we also heard from individuals who fall into the category of immunocompromised or unvaccinated household members being refused. So I just want to make sure, if each case is being considered, that the household situation does not disqualify individuals who may themselves be vaccinated.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that makes sense.
The next person on the list I have is Scott Creer.
Hi, Scott. And sorry, Elena, if you could say who you represent. Thank you. Sorry, Scott, we'll start with Scott. If you could say who you represent.
Right. I'm Scott Creer. I'm chair of the PNA Senate. And if you wouldn't mind, thank you for taking my question. If it's okay, I'd like to ask a non-COVID related question as kind of a palate question. Yeah, okay. You recently announced the University of Minnesota Native American Promise tuition program. Is there an opportunity to include Native American staff in this program? Including Native American staff would align with MPACT 2025 goals on both the staff and student side when attempting to achieve diversity and inclusion metrics and closing gaps for academic and professional success. The current pathway for these staff members to earn their undergraduate degree is through the Regent Scholarship Program, which proves challenging for these staff to navigate the barriers and limitations. Creating ease of access to educational opportunities would reduce barriers for our Native American staff to continue advancing in our system into positions of greater and greater leadership, which would only benefit our university. I think this would also be strong support for the recruitment and retention of our Native employees, who are often on the front lines and extensions of healing relationships between the university and our Native community members, where our history and present day relationships are pretty fraught and painful. I would ask you to consider expanding the program to include Native American staff.
Well, thanks, Scott. That's a great question. And I agree with all the upside that you identify. The original Promise program that we recently announced was developed in response to a request from MIAC, the Minnesota Indian Affairs Council. Was designed in consultation with them. Their original focus was on students. And so that's where we started as well. That doesn't mean it couldn't expand in the future. In the interim, I'd like to understand why the Regent Scholarship presents barriers and try to unpack that so that we can make sure that everyone can have every resource. I mean, that should be the ideal. But in the meantime, I think it's an excellent question and definitely a possibility as the program expands. But would love to work together offline on what you're hearing around the barriers to what is currently available. It doesn't have to be an either or kind of conversation.
Okay, the next person I have is Eric Digray.
Eric.
Hello, Eric Daig from CLA in English. And this is just a question following up on the administrative response to our COVID resolution. And I was just curious, I guess my question is sort of twofold. When will the U test and release information about ventilation in all workspaces and study spaces in addition to, classrooms? And on the other hand, when we will also learn about these things, ventilation on the Duluth, the Crookston, the Morris, and the Rochester campuses? Because my experience is I've just been learning about it on the Twin Cities campus so far.
I'm looking for my notes. You could indulge me for a second. So we have a specific presentation on HVAC, Eric, and that's probably why my notes are not exactly where I thought they were, because we teased this out as a separate presentation item. And so if we could hold your question for the subject matter experts who will be doing a presentation to you in this agenda today, and if that's not satisfactory, maybe we can loop back to make sure we get to everything that you were inquiring about then, rather than me trying to piece it together when we know they're coming up. Next question, please.
Next, I have Michael Minta.
Michael.
Okay, great. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So President Gable, I want to ask about the contact tracing policy. I know in response to the resolution that was passed by the Faculty Senate and University Senate, and also the provost has mentioned this many times about the idea of that the university is designing a contact tracing infrastructure. So do you know when will we have information about this exposure system that will allow student, faculty, and staff who've been potentially exposed to COVID? So any update on that?
So some of the details are in the response, but the best person to ask about contact tracing is Jill DeBoer, who leads HERO, or Health Emergency Response Office. And so I will respectfully cede to her to help guide us through how this works which is with how it works. So thank you, Jill.
Thank you, President Gable. I will begin to answer, and I'll ask Dave Golden to also assist as needed. So my name is Jill DeBoer, and as President Gable mentioned, I am the director of the Health Emergency Response Office. So I serve as a public health advisor to senior leaders. I also serve as the liaison between the University of Minnesota and the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm a former Minnesota Department of Health senior leader. So your question is about contact tracing, or really what I talk about is case investigation and exposure notification. We've known for some time that the State Health Department is changing their procedures. They announced that publicly last week. And so this idea that every case will get a phone call in the state of Minnesota is really no longer going to be happening. Although cases will get a text from the state, they're prioritizing certain cases for a phone call. And so in advance of that announcement, the system that you're referring to was already released by the president and others, as I think Dr. Jacob Toller announced it as the Inform program. And so there are a number of resources available online, and communication has gone out to students, staff, and faculty about what is your responsibility to inform others if you have a positive COVID test, and what do you do with the information if you're told that you're exposed. So that information has already been rolled out. It's also now being made available to other universities across as really the best practice is to equip people to quickly make that assessment while they're getting tested, and then quickly make those notifications themselves, because they're really the best ones to know what has been, who they've been with, and then to also equip faculty and supervisors to support if they're asked to do that in a supporting role. Dave Golden is the person who has been receiving all the phone calls from students, staff, and faculty as we've rolled this out, and I'm not sure, Dave, if you have additional things to add to what I've answered.
Thanks, Jill. Not very much, other than, excuse me, the other place where we get information is M-Test, and with questions and with M-Test, we're actually able to see cases sooner than when people get contacted by MDH. So in some cases already, it's been helpful to just sort of intervene early with questions that we get. And so the calls have been minimal from staff and faculty. It's not even averaging one a week with questions. People have done a pretty good job figuring out what to do. And then the questions that we get from students, or last week when a couple of Boynton providers identified a couple of cases that might be linked, we can follow up on them right away. And it's been helpful. So at this time, we're not dealing with real big numbers. And so it makes things fairly manageable.
Okay, thank you. Michael, do you have any follow-up? No, okay. So we have 4 more people who have their hand raised. We've gone way over our time, which is fine. We'll go through all 4, but then we'll stop. So Emily, you'll be our last question, but Chris, if you could call on whoever's next.
Sure thing. Next up is Will Jones.
Hi, Will.
Hi, President Gable. I want to ask also about COVID policy and the response to the resolution. So the response in terms of the issue around testing focused on the lack of a need for testing for vaccinated people and the free availability of testing. But there's been, I think, significant evidence that people on campus who are trying to get tested, there's been long waits for testing. And I think one result of that is that people have gone off campus for testing. And so I'm wondering what the university can do to ensure that all students and staff and faculty have access to fast and efficient testing. So that, I mean, one result of going off campus is that, the results are not included in the dashboard. And so it seems that this would be important for getting really an accurate sense of positivity rates and to be able to respond to the potential of outbreaks.
That's right. I think things are greatly improved with full acknowledgement that there was a bit of a bumpy start, but I'll defer to Jill and Dave, who are, frontline on that, to give us an update on where that is.
Sure. And can I ask, when you talk about concerns about wait times, is that on the Twin Cities campus or another campus? Because there is variability from campus to campus that we are trying to address.
What I've heard is on the Twin Cities campus.
Great. And I'll start, but really Dave Golden manages that program. But I'll say I've not heard of concerns about wait times for the Twin Cities campus. And as a way to check that, I'm testing myself weekly, just so I can see as a part of the team, how easy is it to make an appointment, how readily available are they, and how fast do the test results come in. And Dave can give you the numbers, but I'll just say I've had no problems getting an appointment the next day, testing weekly. It's a fast process, and I'm getting my test results back sometimes 24 hours, never more than 48. But Dave, you know specifically from a system perspective what our capacity is.
Yeah, so the capacity has been great, especially this fall. We've been able to have COVID testing available all fall, if not same day, next day. So nobody's had to wait more than a day, Monday through Friday, for a COVID test at M-Test. And so, which has been really great. And the turnaround time for results has been, for the most part, within 24 hours, but sometimes it's gone to 28, or if it's end of the day on a weekend, it might get delayed. But otherwise, we've been able to keep up in this environment. Now, a year ago, whereas we're seeing about 100 tests a day now, a year ago when we first opened, it was pretty rough. We did 1,800 tests in a day at one point. I mean, we do have great capacity, and demand was really high then, but we're able to keep ahead of demand right now.
Thank you. Do you have any follow-up, Will? Okay.
Yeah, I guess, I'm the director of graduate studies in the history department. I've had a number of graduate instructors early in the semester, and about halfway, maybe a third into the semester, saying that they contacted Boynton and were told they needed to wait a week. So I don't think it's the case. That may have changed more recently, but it's not the case that has been that the wait has been a day or two throughout the semester, at least from my own in my own department. I'm also puzzled by Jill DeBoer's statement that you're getting tested every week. I mean, are you recommending that people get in the response from the provost, it said that it was not recommended that people who are vaccinated get sort of routine testing. Should we be doing that? Is that, when should we begin? And my sense is that we don't have anywhere near the capacity to do that type of testing.
Jill?
Sure, thank you. I was waiting to be unmuted. I'm testing every week to monitor how the testing process is going in my role as Director of Health Emergency Response, just so I can answer these questions that people have. When I hear about reports of big problems with Boynton testing at MTest, then I can monitor that with real life experience. And again, I've been doing that since just before classes started, and have not personally seen, nor have I heard from anyone that they have concerns. I'm not saying that the reports you're getting are wrong. I'm just saying it doesn't match my personal experience that I'm doing as a way to have boots on the ground, observation, physically going through the process and monitoring each week how quickly the results come. I also, while I'm unmuted, will say we don't have the same level of accessibility across all 5 campuses, and we have been working really hard. We've addressed it in Duluth. We've worked with the state to address it also in Morris and Crookston. We still have a way to go in Rochester, and I'm meeting with the state and the local health department in Rochester to try to have greater access. But again, I'm testing weekly as a way to just measure boots on the ground, access, and availability.
Okay. All right, wait, let's move on. Chris, if you could call on the next question.
Yeah, the next question is from Karen Sue Talsig.
Hi, Karen Sue.
Hi. I want to thank you for the response to the resolution, and also just say that I'm really pleased about the revision to the vaccination policy. I think these are really positive steps. Before I ask my question, I do want to note that I feel like there is a gap between some of the things that we're hearing from you at senior leadership and what we're hearing in our experience as faculty or directors of graduate students, or for myself as a chair of a department. I'm from CLA, I'm chair of anthropology. I also am hearing about delays in being able to get tests. I also think that around the vulnerable faculty or instructors with vulnerable family members, we definitely have heard quite a few people who were denied, who have infants at home and were denied the ability to teach online, even when they were teaching a class of 200 students in a room that only fit 200. And it's just really deeply problematic to have that person required to teach in person. So even if some were approved, we definitely heard about a lot who weren't. So I'm just pointing out there's a gap between what you seem to think is happening you at senior leadership seem to think is happening and what we're experiencing on the ground. My question is about very much related
30 seconds.
About modality. How will the university ensure that faculty at the unit or department level have authority over modality without interference from deans or other administrators?
Well, I will speak very candidly. I don't consider involvement by deans and other administrators interference. Modality is part of a programmatic effort. How we deliver content to our students is part of the overall deliverable of the campus. It is a space where we can accommodate and have used modality as a means of accommodation on some of the occasions that you describe. And what you referred to earlier as a gap, I don't see it that way. We never said everyone was accommodated. and you hear from the people who are actually running the testing, what's going on with the testing based on their own personal hands-on experience. The way in which modality is selected is based on the pedagogical needs of the class in the context of the program. And that is a group decision. So that may not be the answer that you want to hear from me, but and the provost, of course, can refer to that in more detail during her report as well. So Chris, we're really going over. So let's take the next question.
The next question is from Jonathan Sachs.
Jonathan.
Hi, President Gable. I'm a professor in biomedical engineering, faculty senator from CSE. I'd start by thanking you and the administration for all of your considerable efforts and for your response to our requests in the resolution. So my question relates to the availability of PPE. And the question is how you will ensure that the university provides all students, staff, and faculty with N95 or KN95 masks. We know that the cloth masks that have been distributed to students are not effective enough, only perhaps 45% effective. And in your response, you spoke to, the response speaks to employees' departments as part of the response to providing masks, but there's no mention of how students can get access to better masking. And I will say, as a teacher in one of these incredibly packed small rooms with over 100 students sitting very close to each other, talking to each other as they do assignments and the like, that there's a fear that these masks that the students are wearing simply are not doing the job. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you, Jonathan. So I'm going to defer to Catherine Bonenson, who is responsible for the process around PPE. Catherine, since a lot of people haven't met you, if you could say your name and your title, and so everyone understands why I'm deferring this question to you.
Sure. Thank you, President Gable. I'm Catherine Bonneson. I'm the Assistant Vice President for University Health and Safety. And I can answer part of your question, Jonathan, but also the presentation that's going to happen later today on HVAC and mitigation strategies. We'll get into more detail about what we're going to talk about, the mask program and how faculty, staff, and students can try on KN95s, get consultation around the use of KN95s and other high quality masks. Two things that we are doing, because I know we're short on time, I'll be quick. There is a mask program that University Health and Safety runs where anyone involved with the university, faculty, staff, or student can sign up, can work with an industrial hygienist who will help them understand, what masking options are available and help them order those masks. We're also checking in with UMarket regularly on inventories to make sure that they're always available for folks to order. Does that answer your question, Jonathan?
To some extent, thank you very much. It doesn't address cost, for example, and ease of access to those more protective masks. Are you suggesting that all students, faculty, and staff have access free of charge to KN or N95 masks?
That would be correct if they choose to use them. I mean, if you try them on, they're actually somewhat uncomfortable, and most of us who have used them can probably agree to that. But there are some OSHA stipulations around use. That's why I would say go to the mask support program to understand the full scope of how to use them. But the way that the University Budget Office has asked departments to pay for those masks if a faculty staff member needs one. And so free of charge, I don't know how to state that, but it would not be considered an expense that a faculty member would make on their own.
Thank you. And last question.
Last, we have Emily Vraga.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, I'm from the Department of Journalism in CLA, and I wanted to follow up with the question regarding accommodations for people who have unvaccinated children or immunocompromised. I understand that the response is it's an individual decision between the faculty member and their department and their college and all of that. I think that actually presents potentially a missed opportunity because it creates perceptions of inequality where someone might ask for that accommodation and get met, and someone else who feels like their situation is very similar asks for that accommodation and doesn't know why their request might be denied. And so I think not having a policy that explicitly explains why in certain circumstances, or at very least what the protocol is on how that decision is made, could actually really hurt morale among faculty members. So I wanted to just ask you about how that weighs in when we decide not to have that kind of overarching protocol. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. That's a really good question. And actually, in a way, is a straw man for a lot of the very complicated decisions that everyone is making in their own lives. And then at the programmatic level, college level, and university level, system level, for these last 2 years. And I still can't believe it's been that long, but I know I'm not alone in that. But so there's a balance to be struck between a policy that would then create a top-down methodology, which you all have been very clear that is not desired, versus a lot of local decision-making, which then has the risk of appearing to create an inequity from either one person to the next, or one program to the next, one department to the next, et cetera. And we're trying to strike that balance through the appeals process. But it is imperfect. I mean, you're right. It is imperfect. It's very difficult to do what you're describing or what has been requested without a lot of interference. And we're really trying not to, despite what may feel like appearances to the contrary, and leave this decision alone, just like we normally would. I mean, it is with no pleasure that there is involvement in any of these decisions at a central level. So that's the balance that we're trying to strike, and it's not perfect. So you're right that it could use improvement. Okay, with that, thank you all very much. And the next item is the provost report. So I will turn it over to Rachel Croson. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, President Gabel. I want to join President Gabel in thanking you all for your advocacy in support of the safety of our community through this resolution and its response. I think President Gabel did a great job answering questions, but I'll be happy to do more as well if necessary. I have 5 updates for the University Senate today. One is an item that emerged in responding to the resolution, is that when we ran the process last spring to identify course modalities for this academic year, instructors might have only focused on requests for this fall's classes and had not thought about this spring's classes also. So I sent a message recently to all faculty and all instructors scheduled to teach this spring, reminding them of the process they should follow if they want to change the modality of instruction for their spring class, and if that had not been already approved before. So hopefully everybody saw that, and that there will be more interactions and more discussions as people plan for spring semester. Second topic I wanted to cover was academic integrity. So at the suggestion of Phil Bowman, who was then chair of the FCC, we convened a group last year about strategies to increase academic integrity, especially in light of mostly distanced instruction and assessment. That group has developed some resources and recommendations, which will be coming out shortly. I'll also note that the Office of Student Affairs created and communicated a message that included an embedded video with a number of student leaders aimed at students as well, encouraging them to exhibit the highest levels of academic integrity as our classes rolled out. Third topic, as President Gabel mentioned, at the request of COGS and the graduate school, I've convened a task force to consider and address challenges with the power relationship between faculty and graduate students. As she mentioned, the group is chaired by Phil Bowman, who also sits on the faculty misconduct task force, so that the efforts of those two groups are aligned. I met with that group last week to give them their charge, and I look forward to getting their report and suggestions. Fourth, as President Gabel mentioned briefly, I've convened a task force to look at the system-wide academic calendar with the goal of investigating our start dates, our end dates, A number of advocacy efforts, one of which has been around voting, but others as well for various holidays, and ensuring, of course, that we maintain the level of instruction that's required for our accreditation. And so hopefully that group will come back probably middle end of the spring semester with some recommendations that will then go to SCEP, who of course is control of the academic calendar. Finally, I continue to mention in this body the Liberal Education Reform Committee, which is almost ready to be charged. They'll be consulting with a wide variety of constituents as we consider our liberal education requirements moving forward. So those are the 5 items I wanted to give you an update on. Maybe I'll start just briefly before we go to open questions by addressing Ellen's original question, but there were some follow-ups there too. So as President Gable mentioned, we're evaluating requests to teach at a distance due to health issues on a case-by-case basis. Each college or school has its own process for evaluating those requests. And I have instructed each unit to also ensure that they have an appeals process in place so that there is an external review on disputed cases. So I understand that not everybody is being told yes, and I'm sympathetic to Emily's point that there may be some people being told yes and other people being told no, even though they might their case might look similar on its face. But I'm optimistic, and I entrust our department chairs, our associate deans, and our deans to evaluate cases carefully and to make informed and caring decisions. So with that, I'll stop and see if there are any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Provost Croson. Very much appreciate that report. The next item is the SEC report. I'll call on Ned Patterson to give this report, please.
Thank you, President Gable. I have 4 items to mention. Some of these have been in some communication, some not. The Senate Consultative Committee did meet with Provost Croson at a recent meeting about the COVID resolution response by the administration and gave feedback and input prior to it being finalized. So there was some additional shared governance there as the first one. Next, the SEC leadership is planning a work session with the Consultative Committee leaders of all the Senates, the 8 of us, on how to work best together between the Senates on issues that affect more than one group, and especially when the issue is time sensitive, and kind of come up with some procedures, processes, and best practices to be sure all the voices are being heard equitably and in a good process. The SEC also has heard from a letter from the Committee on Committees and spoken with the chair of the Campus Safety Committee as their committee starts forming, and there'd been an ask to have the rethought whether there might be some changes in the membership of the Campus Safety Committee based on some requests, especially from P&A and Civil Service. So that has been discussed in the Committee on Committees. At the Senate Consultative Committee is back with the Campus Safety Committee itself, and then that with the Committee on Committees recommendation will come to the Senate Consultative Committee, and then probably I would guess maybe in the spring would come to the full Senate if there's any recommended changes and agreement on that to the Campus Safety Committee. And then lastly, as President Gable mentioned, there's a process for filling the Senate Director position. And all 8 consultative committee leaders were invited to the interview of the finalists and got their input. So that was part of the shared governance in making a decision on that position. And that's what I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Ned. The next item is the formal introduction to the Senate of Vice President for Student Affairs, Calvin Phillips, and Vice President for Human Resources, Ken Horstman. So first, I'd like to invite VP Phillips to say a few words.
Thank you, President Gable. I appreciate the invitation to join you today. I'm just starting my 9th month in my new role, and I've been impressed with our university students. And I'm proud to be a part of the University of Minnesota. I spent most of my time getting up to speed with the 20 different units within student affairs. And I've been impressed with the excellent job my staff does in supporting student success. I've been meeting with students to gain an understanding of their experience, concerns, and goals. I host a weekly office hours called Connect with Calvin, and I have regular standing meetings with several student groups and governance organizations. The Office for Student Affairs, along with my system peers, will be focusing on 4 issues related to the Impact 2025 System-Wide Strategic Plan. 1, to establish a system-wide mental health initiative. 2, strengthen career readiness and outcome for all students. 3, establish a holistic approach to student wellness. 4, measure and address annual climate survey data. In addition, I will be paying close attention to the President's Initiative for Student Mental Health, as this initiative will eventually move over to Student Affairs. Thank you again for this opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Calvin. Next up is VP Ken Horstman. Ken, if you'd like to introduce yourself and say a few words.
Thank you, President Gable. I have been at the university now for 7 years. And in my time at the University of Minnesota, I have found opportunities to meet with the consultative committees of the University Senate, both informative and critical to the work in our Office of Human Resources. Often these interactions have informed a new perspective for me by providing input that results in a better outcome. Since stepping into this role first as an interim and now as a VP of HR, I have been grateful for the commitment and dedication of members of the University Senate and its committees to the work that we jointly have done on behalf of the university, its faculty, staff, and students. I look forward to building this relationship even stronger moving forward. And in the coming year, our focus out of our office has been to increase our connection, not only through our policy review, inviting in additional members from the faculty and staff community on direct policies that impact them as we review them, even before the consultation step, but also to reach out and set up regular meetings with our graduate student representatives and officers so we can understand how we can work together on vital matters that impact them. I appreciate the relationships we've built over the last year with our faculty chairs, our P&A chairs, and civil service chairs. You are very important to our work, and I look forward to working with you as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, and thank you, Calvin. Great additions to the team and very committed to the work. Okay, the next item, item 12, is action on the proposed new administrative policy on discrimination. So Tina Marism is here to present, be present to answer questions, but she's not planning to make a presentation because she did so previously. But I want to say that because this vote is on a proposed policy that the policy owner has brought to the Senate for an advisory vote, the Senate doesn't have standing to make amendments to the policy language at this time. So this is an up or down vote after we open the floor to any additional discussion. The policy will undergo a 30-day public comment period, though, before going into effect. So if we could proceed, if anyone has questions or items they'd like to bring forward for discussion, Tina is available and present. Okay, Tina, that's how good your presentation was last time. So Chris, if you could move forward with the poll.
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 130 ayes, 1 nay, and 15 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tina. Okay. Item 13 is a presentation from Facilities Management and University Health and Safety that we referred to earlier on classroom safety measures under COVID. So I'm going to call on James Kottner, who's the chair of the Classroom Advisory Subcommittee, to introduce this, and then we'll go from there. So James.
Hi. Yeah, so in the Classroom Advisory Subcommittee, one of the big concerns, as with many committees, I'm sure, this year has to do with COVID. And so one of the issues in the classrooms basically has to do with, what the engineers are doing to ensure that faculty are safe. And I had heard many complaints from my own faculty. I'm in the College of Biological Sciences, or concerns about air. And so we invited Jay Denny from Facilities Management and Neil Carlson from University Health and Safety to talk to our group. And so it was very informative, and we thought it would be good to bring their comments to the whole Senate. And just in general, I felt much better after listening to these guys, knowing that a lot of things that we were concerned about have definitely been covered by them. But let's listen to what they have to say.
Thank you, James. So now I'll call on Jay Denny and Neil Carlson, who will give a presentation. So, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for having us. So Neil is actually traveling. I think you can see him. He's looks like he's in an undisclosed hotel room here. So I'll run the presentation. He's going to jump in for a few slides and talk about University Health and Safety. And then we're going to go through pretty rapidly some things about airborne transmission and some of the steps we're taking to mitigate the risk associated with that transmission. So hopefully I can share my screen here.
Should be ready to go.
Okay, can we see that? All right.
Yep.
So there we go. So quickly, the agenda. We're going to talk about some transmission risk factors and mitigation. We're going to talk about some of the work that University Health and Safety is doing, both in terms of PPE and just general air quality. And then we're going to get into some of the specifics about ventilation, both in classrooms and in non-classroom spaces. And then certainly happy to answer whatever questions might come up. So everyone wants to know, is my space safe? Unfortunately, no one can answer that definitively. There's no yes or no answer to that. What we can say, though, is that there are certain factors that influence the risk, whether you're talking about airborne transmission or any other pathway. And some of those things, are pretty obvious. We've learned a lot about this over the past, I guess, close to 20 months now. But the amount of time you spend in a space, how many people you put in the space, also what that population is. Is it vaccinated, not vaccinated, elderly, young, right, immunocompromised? Also the virus itself, how much of it might be circulating in that space, what type, what variant, right? All those things contribute to what that risk level is. And there's a lot of things we can do to mitigate that risk, right? Social distancing, ventilation, masking, right? And all of those things kind of go together to figure out what our actual risk is. And again, there's no absolute answer to it. It's all relative. We think we're more safe, less safe, higher risk, lower risk is kind of the way we think about that. And each of the mitigations, right, are going to be more or less effective depending on the situation. And the way we usually look at this is with kind of a standard risk mitigation hierarchy, we call it, right? Where the most effective things are at the top, right? If you can eliminate the risk altogether, that's the best thing you can do. The least effective things are at the bottom. Usually that's personal protective equipment. That's not to say personal protective equipment, things like masks, aren't effective, they're just relatively easy to defeat, right? They're not worn properly. They come loose, right? It's your last line of defense, and you don't want to rely on that alone if you can help it. And then most of the things we're going to talk about in this presentation are right in the middle. They're engineering controls. They're things like ventilation and filters, right? Schedules, those kind of things. So each of these mitigation strategies are going to be more or less effective, right? We can apply more effort or less effort to any one of them. And so they all kind of follow this 80-20 or this law of diminishing returns, right? So you do a little bit and you get a fairly significant reduction in risk. The more you do, the less effective they become, until eventually, no matter how much more effort you put into it, no matter how much more ventilation you put in a space, you don't really improve safety by any significant amount. So if we take a ventilation example, right, maybe on this end of the scale, we've got a poorly ventilated room, right, which everyone agrees is a high risk environment. Maybe on the other end, we've got a class 1 clean room, where you've got hundreds of air changes per hour, HEPA filtration, directional airflow, everything we know how to do to reduce particle counts in that space is being done. Typically, both of these are going to be the wrong answer when it comes to providing protection in the space. On the one hand, we're not doing nearly enough. On the other hand, we're taking the mitigation to sort of a ridiculous extreme for most applications. So what we try to do is find an area where we've gotten a lot of mitigation, a lot of risk reduction, but stop before we do foolish things, okay? And one of the things UHS has been doing to help the engineers figure out how to respond to this situation is to help us understand where we've crossed that line into doing foolish things that are not effective. And so I'm going to introduce Neil Carlson here, who happens to be modeling what we would call the class 1 clean room of face coverings. When we saw this picture, the thing that popped into most of our minds was that perhaps Neil has a more colorful background than we originally thought. And with that, I'm going to introduce Neil, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about UHS, their role in helping us understand the mitigation. So Neil, can you see and hear?
I can. Thank you very much, Jay. And thank you, President Gable, and thank you, committee, for having us. We've done several different things to mitigate COVID transmission. And we've looked at mask respirator assessments and developments. And the mask and respirator work that we've done has been looking at different types of masks and assessing them. I did that for the state of Minnesota during the pandemic. And then we've also been looking at it locally. We had the Minnesota State Fair. We had people try it on, and a broad spectrum of the population. We figured out which respirators worked best and what the limitations were. We worked on distribution of masks and respirators, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but Catherine Bonison was correct. They are free to the people at the university, both faculty, staff, and students. And I think where we could probably work better on is maybe publicizing or letting people know that that's available. We evaluated ventilation systems for classrooms and offices and determining effectiveness of ventilation filtration. So next year. So there are some interesting space considerations. And so our mitigation strategy has to do with the type of environment and the mix of people. In classrooms, we have a broad mix of people. We were concerned about the density, the time, and the ventilation. And before we had the vaccine, last year, we looked at doing a lot of distancing. Since we have the vaccine, we're using that as one of the mitigation strategies. We're also looking at time, ventilation, and also looking at face coverings. For dining and rec areas, one of the major problems with that is that there aren't face coverings. So when you're eating, you don't have a face covering, so it's a little easier to transmit. One of the benefits in, at least with dining facilities on campus, is we have the exhaust fans in the kitchen that pull a lot of outside air. So we're running a lot of outside air in the dining facilities to minimize the exposure. Dorms, you can think of dorms just like your own home. you'll spend time. Ventilation is okay. And there is a lot of time without masks. For instance, when you're spending time with a roommate. Social distancing is somewhat difficult. There's a low mix of people in a shared dorm room and a high mix in the rest of the space. Think of it in your home, you have a couple people that you're with, and that's the ventilation at home is not very good. It's probably 1 to 2 air changes per hour. So that's an area where there it is some risk. Offices, you have time, ventilation, moderate mix of people. The density is controlled by administrative areas and seating assignments. And this is a location that's fairly easy to control with mitigation strategies of both ventilation, mixing the density of people, and having people wear face coverings. And much of my time has been spent with clinics, both the Cook Clinic and the Boynton Health Clinic. And we look at time, ventilation, specialized controls to minimize exposure, and adding an extensive amount of epifiltration in areas where we want to improve or reduce the amount of time when we turn over between patients. Next, Jay. So this came up earlier, and Catherine, I think, did a nice job of answering it. So when we looked at this, there was a gap. Disability Services was able to accommodate individuals who had personal risk. In other words, they had some a situation where they themselves had some higher risk for being exposed to COVID, and disability worked to accommodate them. Then there was a large group of other people who said, hey, I've got people at home who I'm concerned about. They aren't able to be vaccinated. I'm taking care of somebody who's got cancer. I don't want to bring it home. So I talked with Catherine, and I also talked with Mike Osterholm, Lisa Berceau, thought about, well, what can we do? Well, we can give you very good masks. They're masks and respirators, N95s. They are much more available now. They weren't at the beginning of the pandemic, but they're a lot more available now. And we have them, people can come for an individual consult to help them choose which one works best for them, given their risk profile and their ability to tolerate wearing the N95. And students can also obtain 5 3M N95 respirators and 2 AirPop masks at no charge. Please go to that mask program link. It gives you a lot of information about it. There's an excellent research piece with ASHRAE, and you can look at how much time you can spend with someone with COVID and given the type of face covering that you're wearing. And I found that to be very interesting. Next, please. So our current and future research. One of the people that's really been helping Jay and I work through our issues with respect to how we analyze rooms and airflow patterns in them has been David Pui's group, and they've been doing modeling in mocked up classrooms, measuring particle counts, changing the location of the particle generator, changing the ventilation system in there. And it really helps inform us to figure out where we need to put more HEPA filtration, what we need to do with the ventilation system to reduce exposure. And coming up, thanks to a very generous gift of an alumni, we will be doing some measuring of viral particle counts in occupied spaces. This includes athletic spaces, dental offices, clinics, and working with the music program, and trying to look forward as we look more toward a health-based ventilation system rather than a ventilation system that's just based on comfort. And Jay, I'll throw it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Neil. So we're going to go through pretty quickly here, just a primer, if you will, on airborne transmission. I'm going to use probably the word COVID rather than SARS-CoV-2 just for brevity as we go through this, but realize that COVID is the disease and SARS-CoV-2 is the virus. So there's 3 well-known pathways, well-publicized pathways for transmission of this virus. And our mitigation strategies, right, try to intercept those pathways, right? We've got direct large droplet transmission, we've got fomite, which is the surface transmission, and then we've got the aerosols, which is where we'll spend most of our time talking today. Note, though, that masks are effective in all three pathways, right? But the engineering controls will vary depending on that pathway. Okay? So when we talk about aerosol transmission pathways, there's actually three broad groups, right? And we're going to talk briefly about each of those. So first is the close proximity aerosol transmission, right? So my stick figures here show we've got the large droplets, and then we've got a person who maybe isn't getting exposed to large droplets, but they are exposed to what we call close proximity aerosols, right? I'm close to a speaker or a singer or someone who's coughing. And the concentration of those airborne particles is quite a lot higher for me being right next to them than it would be for someone who's further away, right? And in this case, the ventilation rate really doesn't matter. This is all about air movement, right? And it's hard to predict where that air movement is. And it can either help you by dispersing the close aerosols, or it can hurt you by directing them right toward you, right? So close aerosol transmission is a thing we want to try to avoid. If we take a step back, right, the scale gets a little bit bigger here, same room aerosol transmission, right? So this is, same picture, we've just broadened it a little bit. We've still got our folks who are exposed to those close proximity aerosols, but the bulk of the people in the room are exposed more or less to sort of the average concentration of particles in a room. And we're showing an air handling system here where we remove some air from the space, we recirculate some of that air, blend it with outside air, condition it, filter it, and return it to the space. And that's how we control particles, right? We provide clean air, virus-free air, if you will. And that effective ventilation rate really directly impacts that average room aerosol concentration that most of the people are exposed to. It also determines the time it takes to reduce that concentration once the source of the contamination has left the room, that contagious person. So if we take another step back, the third pathway, aerosol pathway, is what we're calling remote room transmission. Most systems everywhere, but certainly on campus, are not single rooms with air handling systems, right? They're larger multi-zone air handlers that serve many spaces in a campus. Maybe it's hundreds of spaces, maybe it's a whole floor, maybe it's a whole building. But we take our same picture here. We've got our room with our infected individual. That air is blended with a bunch of other air from a bunch of other rooms, right? I'm showing them as uncontaminated here. That air is all blended, brought back to an air handler. Again, some is exhausted, some's recirculated. It's blended with outside air, conditioned, filtered, and returned to the room, right? So that's sort of the remote room transmission. Which brings us to the big question that was probably the hardest to answer. Certainly early in the pandemic, it was the driving factor for a lot of our mitigation, the inability to answer this question. Can someone in another room get you sick? Is the short way of asking this question, right? If somebody in an office down the hall coughs, do you get sick? Theoretically, an air handling system can move particles all around a building. However, air handler filters remove particles. Even standard filters do a decent job of removing the kinds of particles that would largely harbor copies of a virus like this. Heating, cooling, and humidifying also helps remove particles. Using outdoor air dilutes those particles, further reducing the concentration that we deliver to the space. And here's the main point. At this time and throughout the pandemic, the work group that's focused on HVAC, we're just not aware of any significant documented evidence of an HVAC system taking infectious material from one room, delivering it to another room in sufficient quantities to cause an infection, right? So that really influences the types of mitigation that we would consider to be effective when we're dealing with safety in classrooms and other spaces. Which brings us to mitigation strategies in classrooms, not coincidentally. So the first step we had to go through to figure out how to set up our systems to reduce risk was we had to come up with a baseline, right? sort of a minimum requirement for use in these spaces that we use for group activities like classrooms. And so we developed one based on CDC guidance and then began evaluating those classrooms in the summer of 2020 to figure out if they met those baselines. And there was a question earlier, and just this note here is that the numbers you're going to see coming up are all specific to the Twin Cities, but there were system-wide mitigation efforts at all the various campuses that were, again, people were on the same team that developed it and then did similar evaluations to what we did here in the Twin Cities. So what is that minimum baseline ventilation for classrooms, right? Contrary to maybe popular belief, the CDC guidance that we're getting, really guidance from all agencies, is not prescriptive, right? They don't say this many air changes or this kind of filter or do this or do that. I mean, most of us wish they would, but that's not how it works. So CDC guidance for really all space types is just to continue to operate your HVAC system. Their quote is properly and provide adequate ventilation, and this is important, for the current occupancy level of each space. So that's sort of the minimum that we had to work with. The Sunrise Work Group, we finally landed on a significantly more conservative approach to our minimum baseline for classrooms in two important ways. One, we chose to set our minimums based on the design capacity, not the current occupancy. So if you've got a classroom with 100 people, we're ventilating as if it's full with 100 people, even if there's 2 people, right? We're not doing anything in response to occupancy. The second thing is that we're using prescriptive ventilation rates rather than design ventilation rates. These tend to be higher than design ventilation rates. In fact, people in my line of work, we spend a lot of time trying to figure out ways to reduce ventilation rates for energy conservation and other reasons. But for our COVID response, we're using the prescriptive rates, which tend to be quite a bit higher than what a space might be designed for. So just a heads up, when you see the number of spaces that did not meet our requirements, you have to keep in mind that the bar we're setting for ventilation is typically significantly higher than code for classrooms. So, and to be clear, the CDC guidelines, right? Those are our minimum requirements. There are other CDC guidelines that go beyond that. Operating systems longer, better filtration, additional outside air, those sorts of things. And that's our approach as well, right? The way I think about it is the minimum baseline ventilation rate is just the ante. You need that just to play. If you don't have that, you're not allowed to be used for group activities like classrooms. Once you meet that, right, the other mitigation strategies are still in effect. Longer operating hours, additional outside air when the systems can deliver it, those sorts of things. So fall of 2020 starts to happen, and we started to evaluate spaces in the summer. Ultimately, 433 classrooms were scheduled for use in fall of 2020. We actually evaluated about a little more than that, 564 spaces, because we were doing the evaluations before we get the final list. 31% of the spaces we evaluated failed to meet those minimum baseline requirements. And what we did is we installed portable HEPA filter units to increase the effective ventilation rate so they did meet the guidelines, the minimum. We had those 175 spaces mitigated before the start of the fall semester. It turned out to be about 200 units total that were installed. Spring of 2021 largely was unchanged as far as the number of classrooms, the number of mitigations. So then we come to fall 2021, and with Delta variant, from the difference between July and August in 2021 is a bit dizzying, right? In some ways, it's a brand new pandemic. It's almost a new virus. We now have a much more vaccinated population. So we kind of started over. This time we had a lot more rooms. We had 872 rooms to evaluate. We evaluated them all. 36% of them failed to meet the minimum baseline. And we put at least one HEPA filter in all 313 of those deficient spaces before the start of the fall semester. As of October 1st, we had 475 filter units installed around campus. Those are FM installed units. That doesn't count the ones that might be installed by a department or an individual. The number for FM is actually today over 500. And as a heads up, we've got a little bit of additional mitigation we're planning for fall 2021. And that's simply weather dependent. Some of the systems on campus were never designed to deliver the amount of outside air we're trying to do right now. And when it gets really cold, we have to reduce the outside air to keep from freezing. And so what that does is in a few spaces, it's going to drop them below our baseline guideline. Right now, there's 17 of them we've identified. We think that's all of them, but currently 17 additional classrooms will require additional mitigation when it starts to get cold. So those filter units are actually being installed this week. They'll probably be done tomorrow installing them, but we're saying by the end of next week for sure. So if you happen to be in a classroom that does not have a portable unit and you show up the next time and it does, that's likely why. The full list of portables is on the website. It has been updated with these 17 additional units. If you're interested, go to facilities and you'll be able to find information on all of the portables that are installed around campus in the classrooms. Which brings us to non-classroom spaces, which is the bulk of the spaces on campus, right? There's 872 classrooms, but there's 10,000 or more individual spaces we could identify from non-classroom spaces. So our approach was similar with a couple of significant differences. First, we're not as conservative with the ventilation rates. Right? We're hewing more closely to CDC and using essentially normal code-required ventilation rates for our spaces. We are monitoring systems at the system level, and we didn't typically do room level evaluations like we did for classrooms. Now, there's some exceptions. Usually they were things that we didn't know were classrooms or were being used as classrooms, media centers, things like that, where they didn't show up on our classroom list, but the activities in the space warranted treating them just like classrooms. So we went through, evaluated those kind of spaces as we learned about them and made whatever adjustments or mitigations we had to bring them up to that classroom standard. But even in non-classroom spaces, those general mitigation strategies apply. Extended hours, increased outside air when we can, enhanced surface cleaning, better filtration, those sorts of things. Again, the FM website has some detailed information about those types of mitigation strategies. In addition, in August, we started to take requests for detailed information on ventilation and other space safety concerns. Most of those actually were filtered out by Neil and his groups over at UHS, but 71 of them were more ventilation specific, and they came to FM. So we provided detailed ventilation rate data for 155 classrooms and about 55 non-classrooms. Those aren't all unique rooms. Some of the RFIs asked about the same rooms, but it was a bunch of data that we provided to various people. And just like Neil said, most of the questions were, prefaced by, "Hey, I've got a kid at home who's too young to get the vaccine, or I'm caring for an immunocompromised adult," and they had concerns. And so we tried to give them as much information as we could to help them make decisions about, what type of mask they need to wear and different things. To date, we've got 65 of those RFIs are complete, 6 we're still working on, and we're still accepting them. So you can still contact UHS with a question or concern. And if it's ventilation, it'll end up in my inbox. If not, Neil's group will take care of them. So when it comes to non-classroom space types, Neil already touched on this, so I won't really talk about dining. Dining tends to be highly ventilated to begin with. Similar with laboratories, right? We get lots of ventilation just because it's a laboratory, so we didn't really have to do any additional mitigation or really much analysis for those kind of spaces. Healthcare has its own set of codes and guidelines for infectious disease, so we're just continuing to use those. Offices are really where most of the judgment, if you will, would come in. FM did look at the large open offices, right, where we had lots of people in a big open space. We evaluated those at a room level, similar to what we did for classrooms. Private offices and other spaces that we don't typically use for large groups, they just have a lower risk of transmission for a variety of reasons. But in addition, occupants have more control over their interactions, right? They can manage those person-to-person interactions or avoid them in some cases if necessary. As we talked about, transport of infectious diseases by the air handling systems appears to be a very weak pathway for transmission, right? So again, if the person down the hallway from you coughs in their offices, and their office is on the same air handling system as yours, it's a very, very remote chance that your immune system is going to encounter enough to care about. Work from home policies have reduced occupant densities in many of the spaces, whether it's an open office or private offices. Now, there are some exceptions, and we evaluate those on a case-by-case basis. One example was Keller Hall. For all intents, from our perspective, it looked like a regular, 4-person office suite. We came to learn via the RFI process that it was really an advising center. Students would come in and talk to people in those offices. So it became pretty clear that that wasn't just a regular private office. So we looked at it and treated it more like a classroom and made some adjustments to ventilation rates to more closely align with that activity. And there have been other exceptions as well. Unfortunately, we're not done yet. This virus just seems to hang on, right? So we continue to evaluate and mitigate as needed on campus. And we'll keep doing that until somebody tells us to stop. Right, until MDH or CDC or somebody says that those epidemic conditions are no longer in place, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. Unlike a lot of businesses that had a major shutdown and had to mothball their air handling systems for a period of time, that didn't happen on campus. So we didn't have to worry about restarting them. We continued to maintain, monitor, and repair them throughout the pandemic. And as Neil mentioned, that consultation and mask fitting services are still available. Contact UHS. They can help you find the right face covering. And I heard a comment before that the cloth masks, which were all the rage back at the beginning of the pandemic, we can certainly do better, and UHS can help find a better solution for those that are interested. List of resources. I won't read these, but just know that if you have a question, don't worry about which bucket you hit when you contact us. Just reach out and contact somebody. We will get you to the right place. If you have a question about ventilation or any safety questions, classrooms, reach out and we'll see to it that the right people are able to respond. And with that, I'm out of stuff. So,
okay.
Questions in whatever format that takes in this meeting.
Yeah, I'll run that for you, Jay. So thanks, Jay and Neil. Colleagues, any questions for Jay or Neil? Karen Sue.
Yeah, I just want to say this was incredibly helpful. I really want to thank you for it. I don't think this is being recorded, so I'm hoping we'll be able to share this with our colleagues in our departments. I think certainly my faculty would really appreciate being able to see this presentation. I also want to thank Jay. When I reached out to you and in the summer asking for information about my classrooms, I really appreciated how quickly you got me the information. I was able to share it with every faculty member about the classrooms they were in, and they really appreciated it. So thank you. But yeah, I'd really like to be able to share this with my faculty.
Yes, I'll answer that one. Karen Sue, it's automatically being recorded and it'll be on our YouTube channel. So very easy to direct people there. And if you need any assistance, fine. If it's a moment's struggle to find it, well, just let us know and we'll get you the link. Other questions? Okay, gentlemen, let me add oh, did you have one more question, Karen Sue, or is your hand still up? Oh, that was a thumbs up. Sorry. Jonathan.
Thank you. I agree. This was extraordinarily helpful. And thank you so much for all of your engineering expertise and efforts you've put in this last year and a half. I maybe missed it. Are you checking the rooms frequently for the effectiveness of these mitigations? Or are you assuming that the insertion of a HEPA filter device, for example, is doing its job? I'm not sure I heard whether you're actually making any measurements on their effectiveness. Thank you.
It's a timely question. We had this discussion in our HVAC work group continues to meet, and we had this exact discussion yesterday. So with respect to the HEPA units, and Neil probably can jump in and talk about this, but we've done a couple of things. One is we've measured, you know, kind of the baseline. How do they work when they're just out of the box and brand new, and you know, how much airflow they have. Neil's also done particle counts and looked at effectiveness. And he can tell you the story, but there's some discrepancy between the ones that don't work well and the ones that FM has purchased, which is the good news. But ongoing, there is a maintenance and a monitoring component to this, right? So just because they work on day one, you know, doesn't mean they necessarily work on day, I don't know what it is now, 500. And so because they're they're manufactured in a factory, it's like a car, right? You expect that most of them are going to behave pretty much the same. So we're looking at ways to sample the mitigations that are in place to see, you know, to get a feel for when we need to do things like change filters. You know, when does the airflow rates, when do they start to drop? We don't anticipate needing to worry about the filters from a filtration perspective. They either work from out of the box or they usually don't. But airflow is our bigger concern, right? As they plug up, they might move less air. We're not close to that point yet, but if this keeps going on, you know, through the fall and into the spring, we're gonna have to start thinking about that. Now, as far as the general overhead ventilation, before I let Neil talk about the specifics of monitoring, most of our systems on campus are electronically monitored, so that continues to be monitored for airflows and different things. So if we've made changes to, say, the room airflow rates, we can generally monitor that without having to go back in and measure those rates. The little bit of good news here is that usually these systems don't move around on their own. So once we've evaluated them and determined that there's enough airflow, it's highly likely that airflow is going to persist for an extended period of time. So I'll let Neil talk about the details of how we count particles and that stuff.
Thanks, Jay. What I've been doing in Boynton Health Services, they have several HEPA filters that they've been putting in, and we've had them now put in the type that we're using for facilities, but they had bought some on their own, and I checked them and they were woefully inadequate. They weren't working well. And I looked at the product information. It didn't have a CADR, which is a clean air delivery rate. So I measured it with a particle counter, and it was approximately the same before and after. So one of the things that we talked about in the meeting is as if this filtration thing continues on, is that taking a sample set, and we've got the instruments to do it, just making sure that the filtration devices are working. Classroom management does go in and check daily to make sure that the fans are on. And typically 1 or 2 fans are turned off. They make sure they're turned back on. The only other thing that I would check, and we're making sure that we don't do it, but if somebody actually touches it, please don't press the ionizer function. We don't want that to happen. I can talk about dead turkeys, but that's another story. But don't touch the ionizer function, just happens.
Everything was going so well, Neil.
Sorry. Yeah, it was tragic.
Okay, Jim.
Yeah, when we met with you guys previously, you know, one of the concerns that faculty have had and students as well is, you know, like you walk into a classroom and there's nothing to indicate that you guys have looked at it and found this classroom to be adequate or not adequate, as the case may be. And that's part of the motivation for having you talk to the Senate now. But I just wonder, what is your thinking on, you know, having a big check mark on a classroom so that when you walk in there, you know that it's been checked and it's okay, you know?
Well, that's a good question. And we've actually had this discussion, right? We talked about ways to, should there be stickers or magnets or, how do we do this? And if we put a sticker on and the sticker comes off, then do people think that it hasn't been, I think that type of labeling can either alleviate fears or stoke them, depending on how effective it is. I guess from our perspective, we decided that we weren't going to do that for one simple reason. We were evaluating every classroom that was scheduled. So the rule is, if there's a classroom, if you're in a classroom, it's been checked. If you're allowed to schedule the classroom, it's been checked. We take that a little bit further. If there's a portable HEPA filter in the classroom, it should be running, right? So we tried to make it as simple as we could. So we weren't looking for red lights, green lights, but your point is well taken. I think my own opinion is we under communicated what we were doing. And we're a bunch of engineers, so you got to forgive us for that a little bit. But we ran around and did a lot of work, but probably didn't think through how much people might want to know about that work. And so I think we're doing a better job now, but I would definitely agree that early on we did a fairly meager job of communicating. I think what we communicated was accurate, but the volume probably wasn't where it needed to be.
Okay. Jerry, you're our last question, so bring it home.
I just wanted to ask about the idea of certifying the function of these units. So I run a biochemical lab, and I have an eye wash in my lab, and I have to push the button on that every week and sign off that it works. And, water is a lot more consistent than electricity. So I really would like to encourage you to have some way of letting us know these things are working. Our seminar room has 2 of them running, and I always look at them and wonder when was the last time somebody took a look. But I don't have to do that with my eye wash because my postdoc usually takes care of it. It's on maternity leave, something I greatly have fought for many years at the university. So I'm very proud of it, but that means I have to push the button on the eye wash every week. And if it's good enough for a professor to have to sign off on an eye wash, I would think that FM could sign off on our filters. Just to encourage you to think about doing that.
Yeah, that's a point well taken, and kind of back to the earlier discussion.
Everybody, welcome back in.
These things are new enough to where we're not quite at that stage yet, but yes, as we go forward in time here, we are going to have to confirm the operation on an ongoing basis. They're so new right now that that's probably it's not warranted to go through all 500 of them right now, but we're working on a way to sample them so that we over time get to enough of them so we're very comfortable that they continue to operate and do what they're supposed to do.
That was a discussion in the last meeting, and both Mike Buck and I and Jay talked about doing that, and we can set that up to start doing that. We were thinking about catching it in a spot where we've got over break, so we can set things up for the spring semester. We can try to find some other spots where we can work with classroom management, at least check it. It does not take terribly long. It's just wandering through all the different classrooms and getting a sample done. But the device we have is an excellent particle counter, and it will tell for sure if it's working or
not. Okay. Jay and Neil, thank you very much. And thank you to Catherine and Jim. Thank you for suggesting this come to the full Senate. That was really helpful and comforting. So, you all have been doing a lot behind the scenes for the last couple of years, like everyone has, but it's nice to be able to highlight what you've been doing and for us to feel comforted by your effort and expertise. Okay. I'll move on to the next item now. So the next item concerns administrative policy updates that have been approved in committee and is presented for information. There are 1, 2, 3 items that you're welcome to refer to. Item 15 concerns old business. There is no old business. Item 16 concerns new business. Please note any new business will be referred to committee unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Okay, so before I call for a motion to adjourn, I'm going to take a little 30-second privilege and thank everyone for their questions, for your advocacy, for your grace as we've dealt with, Karen Sue called gaps, things that are going on that are very hard, complicated, shifting quickly, that we're all dealing with in different ways. It's a strain without question. But I think even though it isn't always easy, that together what we've done for our campus community has made it, of course, safer, which is critical, but also better. And that's, you have to squint to see the silver lining right now, but I'm squinting and determined to continue to do so. So my sincere appreciation. And with that, I will call for a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion?
Sorry,
Rockness,
no
is
one
there a
can,
second?
can undo their mute. So
Strani, or we're just going to say you seconded, Strani. Is there any discussion? All right. Host, if you will post the poll. Okay. Thank you all very much. There will be a 5-minute break and then Faculty Senate will convene, and I look forward to seeing you there. For the rest of you, thank you very much, and we will see you next time. If there are any questions that did not get answered today, or if you marinate in this, or you have trouble finding the YouTube link, whatever, just email us and we will get you what you need. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Okay, I'm going to call the Faculty Senate to order. Our first item is administrative responses to Faculty Senate actions and is presented for information. The next item is the approval of minutes from the Faculty Senate meetings on September 30th and October 6th. No motion or second needed. So Chris, could you initiate the poll?
Give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 78 ayes, 0 nays, and 6 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
Thank you. Item 4 is the FCC report. So Ned, if you could present your report.
Thank you, President Gable. I have 5 items for the FCC report. The first is that immediate past FCC Chair Phil Bowman joined Provost Croson to report at the Board of Regents meeting recently on academic lessons learned from the COVID pandemic. He conveyed the challenge faculty have had during the last 18 months and described some of the innovations made during this time. Secondly, FCC leadership has been working with the administration on a possible non-compliance to this new now vaccine requirement. This may be proposed to be similar to the non-compliance to the attestation. So pending further consultation, that will likely be for discussion and potential vote at the December Faculty Senate meeting, considering a similar process that we already approved for a special panel. Third item is that there's been continued discussions of whether to formalize participation of the Rochester campus faculty on the Faculty Consultative Committee. We've had an unofficial member for a voice, and we're considering likely recommending to have that be an official voting member of FCC, and that would take a bylaws change later in the year. The FCC discussed and provided feedback on the Disability Access and Accommodations Recommendation Summary, which includes professional development requirements and resources for all faculty. And then lastly, the FCC has tried to get back to the usual. COVID threw things off. We had this salary reductions. We've gone back to talking with Finance and Planning Committee and Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Tonneson about the yearly budget process. We just did that earlier today, and then there'll be another meeting in the spring to give FCC's input at similar time that the Senate Committee on Finance and Planning is doing it. If any of you have interest in that, please contact the Chair of Finance and Planning or myself or Vice Chair Colleen Flaherty Manchester. And then same thing with the Benefits Advisory Committee. We met with the chair of that committee, Vice President Horstman, and trying to get on the normal cycle of being sure in a timely manner there's consultation with the FCC about those in addition to the Benefits Advisory Committee. And again, if you have any thoughts or questions about benefits, contact the chair of that committee and or the FCC chair or vice chair. And that is the extent of my presentation today.
Okay, thank you, Ned. Item 5 is approval of the 2023 and 2024 and 2024-2025 academic calendars for the Morris campus. Again, no motion or second needed, but is there any discussion? Okay, seeing none, Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
We'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 71 ayes, 0 nays, and 19 abstentions, that motion does prevail.
All right, thank you, everyone. Item 6 concerns old business, and there is no old business for the Faculty Senate. Item 7 concerns new business for the Faculty Senate. Please note that any new business will be referred to committee. unless special permission is granted by 2/3 of those voting and present. Is there any new business? Okay, seeing none, I would call for a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion? Karen Sue has moved to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Oh, lots of seconds. You don't want to stay? Is there any discussion? Okay, Chris, if you could initiate the poll.
Again, we'll give about 10 more seconds if you wish to vote. And last call. There being 96 ayes, 0 nays, 0 abstentions, that motion prevails.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we will see you again soon. Please email your questions if we didn't get to an area for which you have concern.